ever since human beings have gotten together around a campfire thousands and thousands of years ago, we've always come back to this thing of storytelling. Whether that was conveying how to hunt woolly mammoths, what things to eat, not eat. There were important things to be told through these stories so we can remember them. Obviously, times have changed somewhat, but that human relationship to a story still drives us from our core. Only now, maybe we do that in 280 characters on Twitter, or quickly on a TikTok video or something along those lines, which is why I'm super excited to have Mike Chastaine on today. We're talking about storytelling in the digital age. For those who don't know Mike, he's an award-winning trial attorney, author, entrepreneur, extreme endurance athlete, and mentor. He opened his own firm in 2007 and struggled for several years on the business side. After making the decision that he didn't want to worry about his financial future, he engaged several business mentors and read every book he could about how to improve his practice. Grew his firm to over 7 figures, was able to sell it and remain in an of-counsel position, where he now helps other solo and small firm owners to turn their firms into an asset that is highly profitable. And if his story doesn't match my story that much, or if you haven't got on how similar our stories are, he just wrote a book called Legalese, EASE. We're here from Legalese Marketing, EASE. So I'm hoping we have that much more in common in a positive way. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Absolutely. Anything else you want to jump in on with your bio, or we'll get to it through your story?
No, I think we could talk about it through my story. It's been a long journey, 37 years of practicing law.
Wow. Awesome, man. All right. So let me talk about our last episode, then we'll dive in so that way we don't have to cut up the story. Most recently, we had Meredith Cole and Andy Herrick on. We talked about the 7 steps to better systems. So if you want that really interesting, like the system to create systems, super meta conversation, Meredith, Andy, and I went super deep on that in our last one. Check that out afterwards. But now we're talking storytelling. So 37 years of practicing law.
Correct. So I graduated and passed the bar in 85, got sworn in, started as a public defender right away. I think I did my first trial within the first 2 weeks of being there. Stayed there for about 17 years, and then moved from San Jose, where that public defender's office was, to Sacramento. Worked for a firm for about 6 years, all doing criminal defense, and then opened my own firm in 2007. And through that entire period of time, I was a trial lawyer and did a lot of other things, but that was my primary focus.
Awesome. Yeah, I started out as a prosecutor, and then my wife was a PD. So it always seems it's interesting. You will never get better experience than those jobs at the very beginning, right?
Right. Well, that was the reason I went there. Is I wanted to be a PI lawyer initially out of law school. And I thought that the best way to be successful at that was to have the trial experience. But once I started doing criminal defense, I realized that really was my calling. So I stayed there.
I love it. Well, and now my wife transitioned to PI. So it is what it is. All right. So as we dive into more of the storytelling in the digital age, you piqued my interest. You hit the, what is it, from Pee Wee Herman, right? The word of the day, or the sentence of the day. Read every book he could about how to improve his practice. So if I know you've written a book as well, but what were really like 3 to 5 top most important books that help you make that transition from struggling to successful?
Yeah. So, I think there's a number of really good ones. Richest Man in Babylon is a great book about, the importance of saving money and investing it, followed by Profit First by Mike Michalowicz, which is what we used for our entire accounting system. That made a huge difference in the profitability of the firm. The E-Myth, and specifically the E-Myth for lawyers. So I read both of those, about the importance of learning how to run a business without you actually doing all the day-to-day work. And again, that is critical for both profitability, but also if you ever wanted to sell your firm, it's got to work without you being there. So that was a big one. For me, 10% Happier was a great book on meditation and the importance of, taking time for yourself and quieting your mind a little bit so you can be more focused. Yeah, I mean, I have a whole bookcase behind me of books that really made a big difference, but I would say those were kind of the key books that got me going. And then, I read a ton because as we get into the topic of storytelling, learning how to tell a story and seeing, how does Stephen King tell a story? How does Tom Clancy tell a story, and making it compelling so that people want to know. That's very important for being a lawyer. And well, I think in virtually in any business, your ability to tell a good story is pretty critical.
Totally. Yeah, I love it's funny you mentioned the E-Myth regular and lawyers. I got to tell you, I wanted to be the pie shop so much more than the law firm. I love the original one. So,
yeah.
You mentioned Stephen King. So have you read On Writing by Stephen King?
I have not read that. I've he puts out so many books that it's hard to keep up. I just finished Fairy Tale. And I, for years and years, I read as much of his as I could get a hold of, but I haven't read On Writing.
So it's obviously it's autobiographical. It's him like going through his process. It's so fascinating. I mean, obviously he talks about how drugged out he was for so much of his thing. Like he did not pull any punches on himself, but it's so interesting to have him go into the mindset of how he's, written so many things. As I'm going through the book, I'm like, oh yeah, he wrote Carrie and Shawshank Redemption and this and that and Dreamcatcher and Green Mile. And, it was just crazy to see how many of these things, the Dead Zone, I mean, just a million of these books, very interesting. So especially being into storytelling, I would highly recommend Stephen King's On Writing. It gives you a good, behind the scenes view of this.
Yeah, I'll check that one out.
So when it comes to storytelling in the digital age, where would you suggest a law firm owner start in becoming a better storyteller in, modern society?
Well, there's nothing that replaces practice. So if you want to be a better storyteller, you need to just start telling stories. And, from a lawyer perspective, I think it all starts with getting the information. So if you're going to be telling your client's story, whether it's to a jury or a judge or a district attorney or a defense counsel or whatever, you need to know the information. And that means learning how to ask good questions, to dig down deep, find out what's really going on. Most people don't tell you about their struggles without you probing them and prodding them to give you the information. But once you have it, then it's a matter of determining what is your theme, what is it that what is the message that you're trying to get across, keeping it simple and straightforward. So, instead of having 15 different themes, try to narrow it down to one. And then it's just practicing. I do a lot of storytelling on my bike. I'm a avid bike rider. I've been riding bikes forever, and I practice just going over the phraseology. How do I want to express this so that it'll have the maximum impact in the shortest amount of time? That's the other thing, is that a lot of people, they drone on and they get boring. You don't ever want to be boring. So to keep it, short, simple, right to the point. I think it was, Mark Twain who said, I'm sorry I didn't have enough time to make this shorter, right? He wrote a letter and said that. And that's the key, is to limit the number of words so that it has the biggest impact, using, powerful words as opposed to a lot of the weak words that we use in a lot of our writing. So those would be the things that, just practice it. Just get out there and just tell the story over and over until you get good at it.
Yeah, in terms of the shorter is better, I always vacillate between, like, Jerry Seinfeld's got the quote about, like, a good comedian turns a 13-word joke into 7 words, and then, like, TikTok. We're as much as you want to sit here and slam TikTok for all of its faults, people want the information quickly, in a way that is engaging, in a way that is exciting, in a way that is short. Or at least to the point. Maybe short's the wrong word. So I love that you highlighted that. Are you talking about that mostly from a trial standpoint, from a content standpoint? Does it matter what the where you're going to be delivering the story?
I don't think it makes any difference, whether you're on stage and presenting it, or whether you're sitting in, in the judge's chambers trying to convince him to give your client a deal, or you're talking to opposing counsel, or you're in front of a jury. It's still storytelling, and it's making an impact on them so that they feel what it is that you want them to feel. So you have to start from the perspective of what's the message? And once you understand what the message is that you want to get across, then it's a matter of just, honing it in to that, so it has the biggest impact. I see a lot of lawyers, particular, but other people, if you go to a cocktail party and, there's a guy telling a story and you're like, yawn, I'm ready to, move on, right? As opposed to the other guy who's telling maybe exactly the same story, but it's so compelling that, you're hanging on every word, and that's where you want to be. And that just takes practice.
So is there, it's interesting because we talk about this from the standpoint of like personal branding a ton. Some people are funny, some people aren't funny. So when it comes to like that brand from a storytelling standpoint, like how do you figure out what allows you to tell an engaging story?
That's a great question. I think you have to be true to yourself. So, if you're funny, then, comedy works. But if you're not a particularly funny person, nothing lands worse than a bad joke, right? So you have to find your own style. And again, as I talked about before, seeing how other people do it, listening to other people tell stories, and then finding what works for you. And again, it's about practicing, just doing it, delivering it over and over until you find your style. It took me, and I would say I'm still developing it, but 37 years of being in front of juries, being in front of judges and opposing counsel, and even your own clients, telling the story of why should they hire you? Why are you worth more, the fee that you're charging? That's all storytelling. It all boils down to telling a story and getting comfortable with it.
Where do you see, look, we are in a results-based industry, right? Like you could do the best you've ever done and lose a case. You can, I don't want to say half-ass it because hopefully no lawyer's doing that, but you could like 3/4-ass it and win. So in terms of getting the feedback to know that you told the right story, like where does that come into play from a from a trial standpoint? How do you separate the result from the ability or effort or whatever you want to call it?
Yeah, that's a great question, because you're right. Some of the best closing arguments and trials I've ever presented did not get me the results that I was hoping for. And then others where, I felt like I did a good job, but I wouldn't put it in the top 10, and then, I get an acquittal. I think you have to look at the trends, and I think that's true with all results. You got to look at, over a period of time, are you getting good results? And if you're getting good results, then it means you're on the right track. It doesn't mean that there's not room for improvement. And if you're not getting good results, then you need to change something. But, it's a little bit like looking at the stock market. You look at the stock market one day and, stocks are down, does that mean you abandon ship? Well, probably not. You look at the trends, and if you're doing good over an extended period of time, then you're moving in the right direction.
So then I like that from looking at the trends. So I want to ask this question phrased in a very specific way. So I'd like to think that any of us would become better speakers doing, that many trials over that length of time. So my question about how you've changed your delivery is not so much from that perspective, but from what you've seen the changes in society over the last, 37 years. How have you brought that into, changing closing argument, changing how you tell a story, how you craft a message?
PowerPoint is a big difference. When I first started practicing, there was no PowerPoint. You showed up and you had to be convincing with the spoken word. I think people now are much more visually oriented. And so, to give a presentation without a PowerPoint, I think you're shooting yourself in the foot, or something like PowerPoint anyway. But and I also think that people's attention span has shortened, and so it becomes even more important to be compelling. And even if you're using a PowerPoint, your visuals of how you present yourself, movement, vacillation of tone. I've been known to scream in the courtroom. I've been known to lay down on the floor and wiggle around. It depends on what it calls for, but to be dramatic and some might even say over the top, but again, it depends on your personality and your presentation. But I think that's the biggest change, is that people have shorter attention spans and they need more visuals. And so to the extent that you can present that, and it's a whole lot easier than it was, in the 90s when, I remember doing trials where I brought my own projector, my own crappy laptop, my own screen, because the courtrooms didn't have that. I was kind of ahead of the curve a little bit. Nowadays, it's all set up. You just plug in, and and the courtrooms are all set.
Hopefully,
for it.
It depends.
Yeah,
you might
most
still
of them
find
are.
some counties.
Yeah, I suppose you go to Tulare County maybe, but or Tuolumne County, where they're still using gas lights, but for the most part, at least in California, where I've done all of my practicing, they're building new courthouses and they're pretty state of the art, I'd have to say. So, so it is a big difference. But the direct answer to your question is, I think people are more visual, expect more visual, and have shorter attention span. So these long 3-hour closing arguments, I think again, I try to keep my closing argument no more than 45 minutes. That's, and it doesn't really matter how complex the case is. If I can't simplify it in 45 minutes, then I'm not doing my job.
Yeah. If you had more time to make it shorter, or whatever the quote is.
Exactly.
No, I know.
Well, I was just going to say, from a trial perspective, I start my trial prep with the closing argument. What is it that I want to say? And then how do I develop all the pieces that give me the ability to say it? So I'm working on closing argument. I got a trial. I got one case that's left that I'm supposed to do in February. And I'm already working on the closing argument. And because it takes that long to get it down.
Makes total sense. Yeah, I know, from a war story perspective, remember one of the much more experienced prosecutors when I was there had a case where somebody was strangled, and so like basically the defense was, it was in anger, no time to think about it, and so it was like 7-8 minutes of joking, and so prosecutor takes his tie off, puts it over the banister, ties it, and just like sits there in silence. Mm-hmm. And you sit there 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute. He's like, all right, well, now 6 more minutes. The defendant sat there and now they're trying to tell you, didn't have the chance to experience it, and obviously that was not obviously from that, but that was a guilty. And I just, that moment really sits with me in terms of the demonstrative of it, and using time as an advantage in that moment of just the silence of everything. Very interesting. So what would you say? Obviously, we talked a lot about from the jury, from the not the jury selection, from the in trial standpoint, but from the business standpoint. You read these books, had these mentors turning the business around. So how did you change your storytelling from like a marketing perspective to help assist in that, change of the firm from struggling to successful?
Yeah, that's another great question. Again, I think it is in part about the story. What is this? What is your unique selling proposition? What is it about me or my firm that somebody should consider when, there's a lot of criminal defense lawyers in any jurisdiction. So why should they choose one over the other? So being able to tell your own story in a compelling way that connects with people, I think, is pretty important. And as I, have said many times in several other podcasts, developing the data of what is really going on. So when we talk about trends, we measure everything in our firm. And so I know what, marketing is working, what message is working, what lead source is working, how our script, so everything is scripted out, how the phone's answered and all that, how that script is working, because I measure those numbers, I review those reports on a daily basis. And I think all of that put together helped make us financially successful. And by having the financial success, we were able to hire, great people to continue doing the work, staff that really cared, and really orchestrating the client experience. So it wasn't just, what we set up on a website, but when they walked into the office, what did they see? What plaques were on the wall? What was the message that they got? And that includes, smell. We use scented candles and some offices use music, this total experience. So when they walk in the office, that story continues on so that they feel like there's this congruency of information.
What I want to go deeper on what you're talking about there. So you're talking about, measuring everything to know what's working. What I'm assuming we're talking KPIs and metrics.
Yes.
Okay. So what were some of the biggest ones that you were tracking to know, what marketing efforts were working?
So so there's two ends of of this equation. One is the front of the funnel, right? How many leads are coming in and where are they coming from? To be able to track that and to know is, our marketing dollars being useful, is our ROI what it should be? And then from there, once it comes into the funnel, the lead, how many of those are qualified? And all that meant for us was, did they have a problem that we dealt with in a jurisdiction that we did it in? So, if we get a family law problem in LA, clearly it's not a qualified lead. How many of those are setting appointments? So that's telling us, is the script working? How many of those people are actually showing up? Because everybody kind of thinks, oh, if they set an appointment, they show up. Well, not true. And then how many of those are hiring? And the beauty of that is, as one of my mentors always said, business is simply a math problem. If I know what my average case value is, and I know what my goal is for revenue, and I have those other numbers, how many qualified sets, shows, and hires, I can just do the math backwards and figure out how many leads I need. And then I know what my marketing budget needs to be. So, and we have years and years of data, which help me sell the firm. But those are the things that are really important. And then, so that's the front end. And then the back end is, well, what practice areas are profitable? During COVID, we had a very robust DUI practice. During COVID, the bars and the restaurants all shut down. So we shut down our DUI practice. Didn't mean there weren't DUIs out there. It just meant that it wasn't profitable for us to do it anymore. And because we had the numbers, we knew. Now, we're reconsidering that because the bars and restaurants are open again. And, it is a good cash flow practice. But again, we do it all based on our numbers. And that's why measuring everything, how many billable hours, how long does it actually take to do a DUI or a assault with a deadly weapon? I mean, these are the things that we know, and so we can price them properly as well.
And so when you say you shut down the DUI practices, does that mean like you turn down those cases, or you just stop marketing for them, or like what was the? Give me a little more specificity. Okay.
Both. So we stopped marketing. I mean, that was over half of our marketing budget, because DUIs are expensive to market to, because everybody does them. We had a lawyer. So at the time, we had a paralegal and a lawyer who that's all that they did. And the lawyer decided, to leave the firm and go do PI work. So we just didn't replace him, and we let the paralegal go. So that cut our overhead. And then, every once in a while we get a case and we just refer it out to someone we know who does a good job. But because we're not marketing to them, we don't get that many calls anymore. But we knew, we knew what our acquisition cost was. We knew what it cost to actually do the do the case, and it just the numbers weren't adding up. So instead, we put our resources into another area, which was much more profitable, and it made good sense for us then. Now that COVID's sort of ending, I guess, we're reconsidering. A decision hasn't been made, but at least, at the end of the year, we always kind of open the box up and go, well, what else could we do? What should we change? And that's one of the topics that we're talking about.
And so it was interesting. You sort of answered you answered my next question. So I'm going to change my next question. Spoken like a true lawyer, right? And during a good cross. No, so you were talking about, obviously, look, COVID happens. That's a very specific thing that causes us to have to dive into the numbers immediately. You're talking about at the end of the year, you're reassessing those numbers. So walk me through a little bit deeper on how often you're looking at the numbers or how that discussion happens about what to do with them.
Okay. Yeah. So I look at the numbers every day. We actually have an employee in Mexico who his primary job is to crunch all of our numbers and give me a report every day. So I know, and then I look at the P&L and the bank accounts every day as well. So I know where we are at any given time. And, if those numbers are, red flagged for me, then I start to look at it. I don't, one day or even 1 week does not cause a trend, but over a period of time, if we're not going in the right direction, then, we have some conversation. We might talk to a vendor about, what's going on. But the end of the year in particular, so we're doing that on a regular basis. But the end of the year, at least in our practice, from basically this point in time through Thanksgiving, through Christmas, everything slows down. The cops go on vacation. Nobody wants to go to trial. Everything slows down. And so this is a really good time to, roll up our sleeves and get down to, okay, well, this is what's going on. How can we improve it? I've been meeting with all of our employees and asking them the questions. What can we do to make your job easier? And then develop a system around that. And as I say, I think the end of the year is just a perfect time to do that. So when we hit 2023, we're off and running, and we don't have to be messing around with that.
And I love that question. What can I do to make your job easier? I think it's so funny. We just bought new printers at the office and my staff was like, the other ones were fine. And we're like, no. It's a $300 printer. For you to have the last one jammed and have issues finding toner and all that, like, please, in the future, like, just let us know that something's causing you any heartache. For a couple $100, it's worth it for you guys to appreciate it. So I love the way you phrased that question. What can I do to make your job easier? Spoken like a good boss.
Yeah. Well, it one of the most expensive things that happens, especially in a small firm, is turnover. And if you can avoid, and we didn't lose any employees this year, which is great, saves us a ton of money. Anything that you can do to keep a good employee, and as you probably know, pay matters. You got to pay fairly, but there's so many other things that are going on. They have to like the environment. They have to like working for you. They have to like their job, and they have to feel like they're being heard. And I think that question in particular, what can I do to make your job easier, means that they're being heard.
Well, and it's like, look, during the Great Resignation, we had that moment in time where employees had way more power than they've ever had before. Or even I've seen it, petering off already. There was, barring the fact that you gave every one of your employees a 30, 40, 50% raise, there was always more money on the table for them somewhere else. And so it's a credit to, every business owner who maintained any amount of staff, because they had more options than they've ever had before in that window of time.
And I have to say, I have to give credit to, I sold the firm to a very experienced lawyer that I handpicked, and he agreed to take over. I stayed on of counsel more in a business situation, but the credit goes to Martin for keeping, everybody. I mean, they liked him. We had zero turnover from the time that we sold to now. So that's been almost a full year. And it's really credit to him that he's done the things that he needed to do to keep the good folks that we had.
Awesome. All right. So I want to change gears a little bit. Before that, anything else you want to make sure we cover or talk about when it comes to that storytelling in the digital age?
My recommendation for new lawyers. So the bar exam results just came out. So there's a bunch of new lawyers, at least in California. My recommendation to them is that they should be reading every single day, reading something, because again, you learn how other people tell stories and you start to expand your wealth of knowledge. That's got nothing to do with the law. You can read anything you want as long as you're reading something. That's the big thing. And then practicing, whether you're practicing in front of a mirror or like I do on a bicycle, wherever, just practice learning the phraseology so that it becomes smooth, have a vocabulary that's interesting.
I love it. All right. So now I want to talk about the book. So you've been practicing for 37 years. You've got the firm since 2007. You sell it. You're of counsel. The book comes out. So walk me through that process. Why write a book? How'd you find the time for it? What's in it? Who's it for?
Sure. So I need to go back a little bit. When I was the public defender, the ink was still wet on my bar card. I got the great opportunity to spend time with senior lawyers and listen to their war stories. I mean, we literally would go to a bar called the San Jose Cafe and, have drinks, and I would listen to them tell their stories. And that was a great learning experience for the courtroom. But what I also saw was the toll that the stress was taking on everybody. And a lot of really fine, dedicated, good lawyers kind of fell apart. I watched it, and it was sad to see. And so I knew that I did not want that to happen to me. So over the years, I just would learn techniques about how to manage myself, manage the stress, deal with these things. And that's really what the book's about. So one of the big topics that I talk about, I think there's 3 separate parts in the book about sleep, getting enough sleep. It's the secret weapon to peak performance. Without good sleep, peak performance does not exist. So,
and the funniest thing for me on that one is we have so little science about why we actually need sleep, but a ton of science that talks about the negative implications of not getting it. And so it's like this interesting, I don't want to say it's a dichotomy, but it's always interesting to be like, look, we don't know exactly what sleep does for your body, but if you don't get it, you just completely fall apart. So,
right. And there are some really good books. I mean, Huffington wrote a book on sleep, and it's really, really powerful. But there's a lot of good studies, and you're right. I mean, what we do know is that if you don't get a sufficient sleep, your performance really takes a dive. So what I did is I wrote the book in a way that it was really simple to read. It has a huge bibliography in the back of all the sources, or many of the sources. But what I talk about is just do this. So there's a chapter on making your bed. Now you can read all the foundational stuff about why it's important to make your bed, but if you just make your bed, you have that one victory first thing in the morning. It's a great way to start. I talk a lot about, controlling your cell phone and controlling your email. Too many people that I know let email and their cell phone control them. And I'm a big fan of, put that thing, it's a tool. You don't bring out your hammer for everything. Why are you carrying your cell phone around 24/7? So it's ideas for people to consider, to be happier, and perform better and do a better job. And a lot of that includes the courage to say no. To say no to clients that you don't want, say no to work that you don't want to do, say no to working, 18 hours a day. I mean, none of that's good for law. So that's what the book's about.
I love it. So geared for law firm owners, geared for lawyers, geared for.
I wrote it specifically for lawyers because, obviously that's my background. But frankly, it would work in any industry or for anybody. Everything that's in there could be translated. I don't care if you're a plumber, washing dishes, digging ditches, all of those things translate. Now, maybe not every single one, if you're a ditch digger, you maybe don't have the time block, but, any professional for sure. And, but I specifically geared it to lawyering because, obviously that was my background.
Makes total sense. All right, I'm gonna totally cheat on my next question. I know you've been on a bunch of podcasts. I know you reference it, and I've listened to some of them. What's the best question that someone's asked you that I didn't ask, or what's the best answer you've been able to give on all those podcasts that we can have here, just to give the listeners something more?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think, I don't know if it was a specific question, but, the message that I always want to get out to people is, and especially lawyers, is that you actually matter. How you feel, how you take care of yourself matters. You're not just a cog in the machine. And especially I think a lot of small and solo owners, they intuitively know that they don't want to be a cog in some big law machine. That's why they went out on their own, but then they don't give themselves the respect. So let me give you an example. I'm working with a client right now, and his big challenge is taking time to actually work on his business. Now, if he makes an appointment with you, he shows up 100% of the time, but then he makes an appointment with himself and he blows it off. And I'm like, well, why are you less important than that other person? You gotta prioritize yourself as being important enough to keep your obligation. So I recommend, and I have said this before, my hack is I plan my week out in advance, but I do it on Friday, the Friday before. And I do it for two reasons. One, when I look at the Friday, it gives me an assessment. How did I do this week? And if I miss something, I have time to actually fix it, right? As opposed to if you wait till Monday morning or Sunday night, you don't have time to fix it. And two, I make obligations to myself. I time block, I'm going to do this. I set my workouts, these are the workouts I'm going to do next week. And I can tell you, probably 8 out of 10 times I show up and I go, I don't really want to do that workout, but I've already made an obligation. I'm going to do it, and I muscle through it. But that's true with working on your business or taking care of your family or your spiritual life or whatever else is important to you. Set that time aside and make it a priority. Make yourself a priority.
So super selfish question, but I have this question. A lot of our listeners do too. Look, you booked this, or your team booked this, somebody booked this weeks ago, if not months ago. So when you're sitting there to plan out like the Friday for the next week, but you've got all these things booked out already in advance on so many things, like how do you balance those? Do you limit yourself to a certain number of podcasts every week? Do you limit yourself to that on certain days? Like what's the intersection between all the things you can control and all the stuff you're externally required to do? Or
well, so thank you for that assumption that I have a million podcasts to do a week, but the beauty of being kind of semi-retired the way I am, my schedule is not super busy. But when it was, the probably the better analogy would be, when I was doing trial work, I had to be in court, right? Monday morning and Monday afternoon and Tuesday morning. And so how do you fit everything in between that? That's where time blocking becomes really important. You need to have a pretty good estimate of how long is this going to take. And then I always tell people, estimate 50% more. So if you think something's going to take an hour, give yourself an hour and a half because it probably will take that. Worst case scenario is it takes an hour and you got a half hour to play with. So it's there's the old story of if you had a glass and you had rocks and pebbles and sand and water, what's the order you put them in, right? And you can get them all in if you put the big rocks in, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, and then the water. But if you put the water in first, and then the sand, and then the pebbles, the big rocks don't fit. So you got to prioritize what's important. What are the big rocks? Those go in first. Get those on your calendar. For me, exercising, especially when I was, actively racing, that was a priority for me. So I had to block that off and say, okay, this is the workout that I'm going to do, and this is how much time it's going to take, including, load my bike on the car and traveling to wherever. Block that off, be realistic about it, and then guard it. And the same thing with vacations, right? I would book my vacations months in advance, and I'd let everybody on the planet know Mike's not going to be around, because he's gone. And I never had to miss a vacation because I let everybody know.
Yeah, and I will say, I love what you talked about with the 50%. One thing that I've been doing that's been super helpful when it is possible, it's not always possible, is I'll take that. All right, it's going to take me an hour and block an hour and a half, but I'll block an hour on one day and the half an hour on a different day, because then it's like you come to it with, fresh eyes, and you're like, oh, I can't believe I wrote that. That sentence makes no sense. Or, I've been mulling on it in my head, not consciously. I've got a new idea or a track I want to take with it. And sometimes I think we rush through these things. Whereas even if you block the hour in half and half, you'd have a little bit more, I don't know, brain power on it, maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've written an email, did not send it, let it sit there, went back to it and went, oh my God, I'm glad I didn't send that, because it doesn't say what I wanted it to say. I was caught up in the moment or the emotion or whatever. I think that's absolutely brilliant. If you block your time off properly, you're not rushing. You're not doing things on the day that the deadline. You give yourself the time to review it, which is absolutely critical. And the other thing that you need to build into it is time to just think. We're all about doing, but what are we being paid for as lawyers? We're being paid to think, come up with strategies that aren't always super apparent. And, I've used the moniker, the tagline, creative solutions for difficult problems. And that's all about just thinking it through and running, playing the chess game all the way to the end and going, oh, that's not going to work. It all sounds great, but that's not going to work. Let's do this move and at least give ourselves a better chance of winning.
Well, and I think any of the research on that, or any of the experts on that, I think are going to go back to exactly, what you talked about, bike riding or taking the walk through nature, or, some sort of physical activity to give yourself that physically focused, mentally wandering standpoint. So,
well, and then you just go through the flow. I mean, when I'm riding my bike, down the road, I could be, chit-chatting away. Nobody cares. And it's free form, and stuff comes up. Stuff will come to me that I'm like, I would have never thought of that sitting at my desk, and now I just need to remember it, and get it written down, and then start to, build off of it. But yeah, that's been my practice. I never do a closing argument. I've at least ridden the bike on it once.
I love that. All right, so I want to talk about our next episode, then we'll come back for takeaway and best point of contact. So what are we at? We are 12. So 12/1 next Thursday. So not Monday, but Thursday at 5:45 Eastern time. So going a little bit later, we've got David Nagel on. David is a mindset coach who's going to talk to us about, shocker, the 3 mindset shifts to double your revenue. So that'll be next Thursday, 12/1, 5:45 Eastern time. So especially for all you West Coast people, this is the episode that we have positioned for you. We probably should have done that for Mike, because I guess you're only 2 hours behind now, but we're working with it. So if anybody's been listening for the last 50 something minutes and they remember nothing you said except what you have here, what would be your biggest piece of advice, your most important takeaway to help more lawyers be the exhibit A of a successful attorney such as yourself?
So I'll come back to what I said before about sleep. Prioritize your sleep. I've always felt that it was better to be well rested than necessarily, prepared. because I can think on my feet. And, if you've been preparing over a period of time, cramming the last minute is, to my way of thinking, pointless. So prioritizing your sleep on a consistent basis. That doesn't mean that, you might not, work late one night because there's something that has to be done. And I certainly have done that many, many times, but on a consistent basis, getting, that 7, 8, 9 hours sleep, whatever it is that your body requires, is probably the single most important thing you can do for peak performance.
I love it. Yeah. And there's I don't know if the show's on Netflix or my wife just watches it on Netflix. It's called Awake, where they have people stay up for 24 hours and then they make them do like menial tasks, threading a needle or balancing, whatever. And it is amazing to me, like how quickly you are the 0.30 equivalent blood alcohol content on somebody just from not sleeping. So I love your idea.
And Jordan, I'll just tell you, I was for over a decade at expedition length adventure racer. I do races that would be 10 days long, where you're only sleeping a couple hours a day. And I know about sleep deprivation. I mean, I've fallen asleep riding my bike. I've fallen asleep hiking. I've been lost because I couldn't read the map, all because of sleep deprivation. So it's real near and dear to my heart about how important it is to get good sleep on a consistent basis.
I love that. All right. So for everybody listening and watching, we hope to see you back on 12-1 for David Nagel's episode. But having listened to Mike here, and whether you've read the book or you want to read the book, what's the best way for people to stay in touch with you, Mike?
So you can go to my website, which is MikeChastaine.com. It's CHASTAINE, because most Chastains don't have the E at the end, .com. I post on a regular basis information on my YouTube channel, on a segment I call 20 Minutes with Mike. And that's at, on YouTube, Mike Chastaine. Or you can just email me directly, Mike@michaelchastaine.com. And I'd be happy to set up a time. And like I say, I'm working with solo and small law firm owners to make them more productive, give them the opportunity to turn their firm into an asset. And if nothing else, just have them perform better. And so I'm working on a one-on-one basis with folks like to do that. And again, you can reach me through any of those forums.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you to everybody who has watched or listened to this. We hope you got a lot out of it. I know I did. I've got a whole page of notes, which is always a good sign that it was a wonderful episode. With that, we'll see you all back on Thursday the 1st at 5:45 for our episode with David Nagel on the mindset shifts to double your revenue. Until then, have a wonderful Thanksgiving. If you get no other gratitude, I'm thankful for you being here with us and taking some time to watch the show.
All right.